Let's bring in House Republican Whip Steve Scalise. Congressman, thank you for joining us. So if we're going to get the Republican version next week, what happens to the millions of Americans who are getting that additional $600 per week of unemployment benefits when they expire at the end of next week?
Yeah, Sarah, it's good to be with you. You know, I know President Trump's real focus is on trying to help people safely get back to work, help safely reopen schools. And we recognize there's still millions of Americans that are unemployed. There are millions of Americans that continue going back to work. But the one thing that's become a problem is that, you know, we've seen studies about 5 out of 6 people that are getting that enhanced unemployment are actually making more money at home than they were at their job. That's not something you want the government to literally be competing against people's desire to go back to work. So that's got to be fixed. That's been a problem for a while. But we've got to make sure, look, there's hundreds of billions of dollars still out there that haven't been spent that we appropriated for things like the Paycheck Protection Program, even money for schools that we can make sure are more flexible to help schools buy sanitizer and masks, to help businesses continue to do what they've got to do to reopen. That's I think, where the real focus needs to be, is to help people. There's a lot of money already out there. Let's make that money work even smarter and better to get people safely back to doing the things they did before.
Since you brought it up and we're talking about whether those expanded unemployment benefits should be continued, I mean, we've also seen plenty of data showing that, yes, people are making more potentially off those unemployment benefits and that bonus, but is there any evidence to show, Congressman, that that's keeping them from going back to work? I mean, we're still in the middle of a pandemic where cases are surging in many parts of this country. So how can you be sure that that's actually incentivizing them not to go back to work?
Sarah, I hear from small business owners every single day that are telling me they've offered jobs for people to come back to work in businesses that are safely opened again. And they're able to get some of them back, but some of them just are telling them, I'm making more money at home, and they're not coming back. It's a real problem. You know, the other side of that is there are a lot more opportunities to create jobs, and you've seen it in some of the industries that are expanding, even in a tough time, you know, whether it's people making PPE, trying to make masks, doing other things where there's a demand. We ought to be focused on bringing a lot of those jobs back from China, because right after this pandemic broke out, as China was hiding the facts from the rest of the world, they were hoarding up all the PPE because they made almost all of it. And so when our doctors and nurses were trying to buy it, they couldn't find it anywhere. Why don't we make that here in America? That would create really good jobs, and it would give us more national security to be able to do that. I know President Trump has wanted incentives to help bring more of that kind of national security manufacturing back into America for pharmaceutical products, as well as for really important things like PPE. That's something we can make in America and create good jobs in the process.
Perhaps long-term, although it's not going to solve the short-term issue in terms of unemployment. And the other factor to throw into this, Congressman, is, of course, that the median starting unemployment benefit offered by states without even this top-up of $600 a week expires after 5.5 months. So if someone lost their job in March time because of the pandemic, that will also be expiring around September time. So there is a big risk of a significant drop-off for those unemployed of any ability to spend any money by the final quarter of this year. Are you worried about that, the impact it might have on the economy, particularly as we approach the fall and the weather worsens, and perhaps the ability of restaurants and hospitality businesses to operate as they are outdoors also becomes a lot harder?
Yeah, Wilfred, you know, there are a number of deadlines, like you mentioned. Of course, the whole funding of government that expires at the end of September. We're in negotiations right now. In fact, we have votes on the House floor today on some of those bills to address that and make sure that we get those resolved before the deadline hits. And so that's what Congress is doing this week as well as next week. So we're going to negotiate, but we're also bringing legislation to the floor. Hopefully we can work through the differences that we have to get that resolved before the deadline is met.
Are the Republicans on the same page when it comes to this stimulus? I mean, last time around, we were in an emergency situation and stocks were falling and we were in lockdown, so it seemed clearer. But now, I mean, you have members of your party, Senator Rand Paul, warning that this is fiscally irresponsible, adding another $1 trillion to the debt. It feels like it's hard to, you know, the whole payroll tax thing, President Trump wanted it, members of your party didn't. Feels like there's a lot of debate and disputes within your party.
Well, there's debate and disputes on both sides. And, you know, you saw, like, Joe Biden just put out another $800 billion proposal last week he proposed $2 trillion more in these special interest kind of cylindro and steroids type proposals, which is not the right answer. So, both sides have disagreements. You did see us come together on the CARES Act to create the Paycheck Protection Program. That saved millions of jobs. I've talked to so many small business owners who wouldn't be alive today, who wouldn't be still holding their employees together and their businesses together. So it worked really well. But we did spend over $2 trillion. There is a concern that there's a level that you surely have to be careful how far you go. When we look at it right now, there's about $500 billion of that money we appropriated that still hasn't been spent. So I think the first thing you ought to do is look at that money, not spend more money, but say, let's make this $500 billion work better in other places where it's most needed. Because clearly, if you over allocate it in some areas, you look at hospitals, you look at schools that are going to need money for sanitizer and masks. Let's make sure that the money can be used for those kind of things. And that money is still out there. Congress doesn't need to pass another bill to appropriate that. So I know there's a lot of talk about that as well. That's what we're doing. We're here to try to work through these differences.
Congressman, as you said, there's been a lot appropriated already, likely to be more. At some point, it's got to be paid for in the future, one way or another. If there was one tax that had to go up, which one would it be?
Well, if you look at the tax on the ability to create jobs in America, we saw that. It was having high taxes was killing our economy. We lowered taxes, and that created more jobs. It also brought in more revenue to the federal treasury. Before COVID-19, the federal treasury was taking in more money after the tax cuts than before the tax cuts. So I think you need to make sure it's smart policy. What we really need to be focused on is watching where the spending is really getting out of control and where you see problems down the road. Look, programs like Medicare that are so important are right now going bankrupt. They're on a path to bankruptcy. We need to save Medicare from bankruptcy. That's a bigger discussion. We've had smaller discussions on it in the past. I wish both parties were there. I know I've voted for bills in the past to save it from bankruptcy and make sure it still works for current seniors. It'll have to work different for younger people, but it'll still be there. That's a bigger discussion. Today, the discussion is on how to get our economy back open safely, how to safely reopen schools. And look, the American Academy of Pediatrics just put out a really good report that not only shows how to safely reopen schools, it also talks about the damage to kids, to our 50+ million children in school if they're not going to school. I mean, one thing to be learning at home, it's not the same thing as learning in the classroom, and it does damage to our children. We need to be well aware of that and follow the guidelines about safely reopening, not say, can we do it or not? We can, of course, do it. Many school systems are already putting those plans in place. Everybody's got to be pulling together to meet the needs of those children. It shouldn't be, right?
Yeah, you opened a whole can of worms there, but we're out of time against the end of the show. So we will have you back to talk about it. Congressman Steve Scalise, thank you very much.